And welcome to meeting 7 of the Parks Environment Committee. And for those in the room with us, the screen at the back of the room, which is in this room, is this one? Maybe it is, yes, over in the corner. That provides real-time updates concerning where we are in the agenda and what's coming up next. And just moving the minutes of the, so no minutes from the last one, and just declarations of interest. Seeing none. Yes, so no minutes to the last meeting, because it's a special meeting, and just declarations of interest. Seeing none. Okay. And so this morning, we're dealing with the PE 7.1, which is the Parks Permits Initiatives, and questions of staff. Oh, I didn't see that. Perfect. So deputations first, Claire Hopkins and Susan Wright. Hi, Claire. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much, Councillor, for
Yeah.
committee members. So, I'm really delighted that you're giving us the opportunity to speak to you today about this exciting park permit initiative. So Toronto Arts Council strongly supports the recommendations in the report before you, and indeed we've been working closely with City Parks Department on the plan. And as you know, with support from Mayor Tory and City Arts Advocate Councillor Fillion, Toronto Arts Council and Toronto Arts Foundation have been developing this idea for quite a few months about a new program for arts in the parks. Susan Wright and I are going to take a few minutes of your time to fill you in on some of the ideas, and we're here to answer your questions. So Toronto Arts Council and Toronto Arts Foundation share the same vision, Creative City Block by Block, which is essentially how to connect the arts, the transformative power of the arts, to all neighborhoods across the city. So Arts in the Parks is designed to bring arts programming to parks to every neighborhood of Toronto over time. We can't get there immediately, that's for sure. The objectives of the program are to increase public use of parks, to increase the vibrancy of communities, particularly in underserved neighborhoods, and at this moment in time, especially those outside the downtown core. We want to create opportunities for residents and visitors to experience high-quality arts events, and Toronto Arts Council is going to increase funding available to artists for public programming. Susan?
Arts programming in parks adds tremendous value because it reduces or eliminates the barriers which may prevent Toronto families from attending arts events. Whether the barriers are financial or geographic, or whether they arise from language difficulties or intimidation, this program can address them all. Further, it will really help arts groups grappling with a dearth of affordable programming space. As you may recall, last year, City Council passed the motion that's on the screen, calling for a hoarding tax. Funds are now being collected in a reserve and will be allocated to Culture Division and TAC to support this new grant stream beginning in 2016. Toronto artists and organizations have a long history of arts programming in Toronto parks already. Even without a specific program, Toronto Arts Council funds organizations offering arts programming in 38 city parks in 18 wards of the city every year.
However, there have been challenges which we've long noted. Artists are not aware of which of Toronto's 1,600 plus parks are suitable for programming, and this is particularly true of parks outside the downtown core. The park permit process has been not clear to artists, and most of all, low public awareness of programming in the parks. So this Arts in the Parks program offers a really exciting solution to some of these challenges. So it's a partnership program between Toronto Arts Council with funding the artists, Toronto Arts Foundation branding and providing volunteers for the program, City Arts and Cultural Services, the Music Office, and of course, a great relationship with City Parks. This pilot program will be introduced in 2016 and will include this new TAC Animating Toronto Parks grant stream that will allocate new funds to artists to support events in 22 parks outside the downtown core. The overarching Arts in the Parks program will celebrate and promote arts and music activities taking place in at least 50 parks throughout Toronto in both the core of Toronto and the inner suburbs. These arts events will be free to the public, and the events, as I mentioned, will be publicized, advertised, branded on site by Toronto Arts Foundation, and hopefully bringing more money in from the private sector.
Toronto Arts Online has been redeveloped, and we have a new event mapping website, and this will have a page specifically dedicated to mapping arts in the parks programming. This will be of real benefit to Toronto residents, visitors, and of course the arts groups themselves to promote their programming. The next couple of slides identify some of the roles and responsibilities of the partners in the program, but we don't need to go through those now.
But finally, this program will be governed by several guiding principles. Programming will be accessible to all Torontonians and celebrate the city's diversity. The full spectrum of artistic expression and participation will be encouraged, and this will be managed, the grants program, through the Toronto Arts Council time-honored system. Professional artists will be paid for their work, and park property will be respected and protected. So that's really our presentation, or our deputation for this morning, and we are so excited about this program, and we've had such great response. It's really amazing the kind of response we've had already from the media, from artists, and from general public.
Great. Thank you so much. And questions of the Deputy? No. See none? Okay. Well, thank you so much as a former member of the board. I think great work, and all the best of luck. I think it's a great initiative. Thank you so much. Max Allen. Mr. Allen, thank you so much. So you have 5 minutes.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm Max Allen. I'm the Vice President for Planning and Development of the Grange Community Association. I'm a member of what we call the Grange Park Advisory Committee, which is a group of people who have been working for the past 8 years on the revitalization of Grange Park, which is just about to happen. We're about to start cutting down and planting new trees. We have a unique management plan for Grange Park in preparation, and Grange Park, unlike any other park in Toronto, is adjacent to the Art Gallery of Ontario. There is going to be in Grange Park a lot of activities which are, won't surprise you to learn, art-related. But this morning I want to ask the committee to exclude specifically Grange Park from the terms of the material that's been presented to you. We love the idea of art in 1,600 parks in Toronto, actually 1,599. Because of our unique plan for managing both the physical aspects of the park and the programming aspects of it, we have quite a successful structure for doing this, and I want to make sure that the Parks Department in a year and a half doesn't by accident, as a result of what you decide here, use Grange Park as if it were just like the other parks, because it isn't. I don't want to seem anti-art or anti-social or anti-anything. In fact, we probably have a bigger arts program in the park now than any of the other parks, and we'd like to keep it that way. Now, I'm asking you this out of an abundance of caution. Where something is not specified, who knows what's going to happen in the future, is my general theory of how the city works, and that's why I'd like you to specifically exclude Grange Park from this program. Thank you. Oh, questions? The chair is busy.
Be clear, you're not anti-fun, Max, right?
No.
Be very clear.
Just
want to be very clear on this.
Just the reverse, in fact. Although at this time of day, maybe.
Just to be thank you.
Okay. Yes? It's a great program. I agree with the previous presentation. It's a great program. I just want to be careful of it, and I wish it success. Yes?
Thank you. Is there questions of the deputant? No, seeing none. Thank you very much. And Sita, thank you. I'm just going to reset your clock.
Good morning, everybody. I will not repeat, or I'll try not to repeat what Max said. I've lived in this neighborhood for 40-plus years, and as Max has indicated, we've been working with the AGO and a range of community partners to really embrace the notion of a community management approach to parks. So that's the principle that we want to emphasize, and as a result of that, we developed in the last 10 years some very specific permit criteria, which we've asked the Parks Department to apply to any request to use Grange Park. So, just in short, we've got, Max has already sort of summarized a very elaborate program we've got underway for the park. We think that this Arts in the Parks program is fabulous and glad that it's focused on the outside of the downtown, because I think that that's really necessary. But what we don't want to have happen is a situation in which things are imposed upon the park through this or any other program. So we would specifically like to retain the principle of community management, and I know that the Parks Department is required to report further on this at some point in the future, and we want to specifically exclude Grange Park from this activity because we've already got a whole system in place for programming and revitalization and so on and so forth. So basically, that's what I have to say.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And Councillor Doucette, a question.
Thank you. I'm not sure if this is on. Hang on. There we go. I don't have a light. I know you're wanting to be excluded. Is that forever and ever, or would you just like to be excluded for now and see how your programming goes with the option of maybe in future being added?
Well, maybe in the future, but I think that maybe until the community management model report is brought forward, so that we actually have a clear sense about our role,
Right.
the community's role in the decision-making about the process, as well as the continued application of the very specific permit criteria which was developed for the park, such as, no vehicles in the park, you have to hand cart stuff in, sound amplification. There's a whole bunch of things that we introduced under former Councillor Vaughan,
Okay, thank you.
which Councillor Cressy is, of course, continuing.
He's on your board, right?
He's on the Grange Park Advisory Committee. He's also on the AGA board. And I might also say we consulted with the Art Gallery of Ontario, their Vice President, Rupert Duchesne, and he's fully on board with our approach to this.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions of the deputant? Nope. Seeing none. Great. Thank you so much. And that's any other deputants to speak on this matter? No. Seeing none. Thank you. And then questions of staff. Yeah, Councillor Cressy.
You go first. I'm not ready yet.
All right. Just a couple questions to staff. I actually want to go not in the Arts in the Park section, but down to recommendation 5 specifically. This is to authorize the GM of PFNR to continue to allow the private event and special events for up to 10 in designated areas. It lists in the attachment B those 10. Can you expand on the criteria and the process for how those 10 were identified, and if any consultation had taken place with the local councillors regarding private sponsorship in those events?
Madam Chair, through you, those parks are at a size that can hold large crowds. They have sufficient parking, and they're removed from residential areas, so noise issues don't seem to be a problem. So those were our initial criteria. And we have also looked at the level of demand, and they tend to be those that are most desired or demanded by commercial operators.
And in the selection of these, and you mentioned some of the criteria used, was the local community or the local councillor consulted? I can tell you that one of the parks in my ward that's listed has had significant noise concerns.
The consultation has been 3 years ago. As you know, this was a pilot project that was initiated and has been in effect for 2 years. So yes, there has been consultations with the councillors
In the past?
in the past.
Okay, thank you.
Sarah's going to put this in.
The consultation?
Yeah. Can't be done without. You can take it out if you want.
That's fine.
Councillor Perks?
Thank you. Just looking at the report, I have a couple of questions. First of all, on page 8 of the report, in the last paragraph, commercial special event fees, market rates, da-da-da-da-da. The market rates constitute approximately 90% of the full cost. So I was reading that, and I was thinking, oh, we're not recovering our full cost with these events? Is that, am I reading it wrong, or?
The full cost is a reference to the city's costing policy. We're recovering more than the departmental cost. Full cost includes the corporation's cost, an allocation of corporation's cost. So we're recovering more than the divisional cost, however, not the full citywide cost.
Okay. So effectively, we're subsidizing these commercial events by about 10% of the cost.
They still bring an additional revenue and additional contribution to the bottom line, so I would not call it a subsidy from a divisional perspective.
Not from divisional, but citywide.
Yes.
Yes. Oh, okay. All right. Thank you. On page 6, there's a reference to the signage following the commercial sponsors policy. Can you just walk me through how that works? Like, what are the policies in place about this signage? Maybe I've got the wrong. Well, in any event, there is in place, I may have the wrong page reference, I just grabbed it quickly. We have in place some rules around commercial signage in parks. We have a policy for how that works.
I'm going to try to explain it, but I'm going to require some help from legal in
Okay, thank you.
areas where I'm unable to. So there's a number of different bylaws that determine signage for in parks as well as for spatial events. Parks bylaw says no signage is allowed unless there is a permit. There is a spatial events related section which allows temporary signage for commercial events, and it also imposes a limitation on the portion of it that's subject to commercial signage.
Sorry, can you say that last, just that last piece again? I didn't follow.
There is a spatial events signage. There's a bylaw that speaks to spatial event signage, which parks used in the past, and it allows temporary signage for spatial events.
Okay. So if I've understood you correctly, the policy for signage is that if they're temporary, they're permitted.
It seems that there has been some gray areas and lack of clarity in various bylaws, so I'm going to refer the question to Lisa Strachan.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. Is my speaker on? Yes. Currently, under Chapter 694 signs, parks temporary signs are prohibited in parks. Signs are prohibited in parks. So they are seeking, PFNR under recommendation number 4 is seeking an exemption to that prohibition to allow the general manager to authorize the erection of temporary signs in conjunction with the issuance of a parks permit.
And, okay, forgive me, but, I mean, are there any, in the proposed temporary permission, are there any restrictions, descriptions, like, or is it just a blanket permission to the general manager's satisfaction?
Under the bylaw, it would be to the general manager's satisfaction, yes, and then it would be up to the general manager to impose restrictions.
So, okay, all right. On page 8, it says that we've just completed a pilot. This is the second paragraph under the table. There was a pilot with the up to 6 special events through 2014. Is there any assessment of how the pilot worked, or is this report considered to be the assessment?
Through the chair, the events that were hosted were very successful.
Well, I didn't ask if they're successful. I'm asking, is this report the assessment, or is there another assessment document somewhere?
No, there isn't a separate assessment document. And basically, the work that was done with commercial event holders went smoothly. It was much appreciated. The public seemed to like it a lot. It's outlined basically here in the report, but the events themselves seem to be very well received. We got good feedback afterwards. We were reviewing a lot of those with the actual councillors in whose wards those parks are situated, and generally we didn't get any negative feedback.
Okay, thank you. Madam Chair, I know I'm over time. If I could have one more question, or I can wait for a second round. One more?
Or we can do a second round. It's up to the committee.
One more is fine? Okay. All right. To the general manager, on the signage for the special events, the recommendation here is to give you a general permission. Do you think that by the time this gets to council, you could write us a brief supplementary with some guidelines?
Through the chair, yeah, we'd be happy to do that. We can provide a supplementary report along with council agenda that would provide some guidelines around the signage that would be associated with this.
Thank you.
Any other questions of staff? Yep, Councillor Doucette and then Councillor Layton.
Thank you very much. Page 2, which doesn't, page 2 of page 4 of the first section. You're saying that you've approximately 22 parks in 22 wards. I understand we haven't necessarily narrowed down the 22 parks in the 22 wards. Will this be in consultation with councillors, or how is this going to work?
Through the chair, it can certainly be in consultation with councillors. PFNR will also be on the committee with the Toronto Arts Council to determine those parks and those locations. So I don't think there's any reason why it wouldn't be in consultation with councillors, and I'd ask Claire or Susan to comment if they want to comment on that further. They're saying thumbs up. Yes.
Yes, I've actually been speaking to councillors in the wards outside of downtown, and we have identified now 23 that are at least close to time.
That was going to be my next question. Who's actually coming up with a suggested list, and where's that going to be going through? So now I understand that the Art Council is going to come up with a list. It's going to coming to PFNR, who will come to councillors. Can we do that?
Through the chair, yeah. If that's the desire of committee, we can certainly work that into the process.
Okay, page 5, I'm sorry, there's so many different reports here. On the actual PE 7.1, page 5, hang on, I'll get it in a minute. At the bottom of the page, it says that number 2, Toronto Arts Council will provide City of Toronto with a general liability policy for $2 million. But then on page 7, item 7, at the top of the page, it says the permit holder will be providing the City of Toronto with the commercial insurance. So where is the actual insurance coming from? Who's actually covering the insurance? Because to me, this sounds as if we're getting it twice, which would be great in some respects.
If I may take that, for any events that are sponsored by Toronto Arts Council, in order to avoid the cost of the artist providing the insurance, Toronto Arts Council will cover them under their own policy. For any individual music in park and arts in park permits that are initiated by the grassroots musicians or artists outside of Toronto Arts Council, they will not be subject to a fee. However, they'll have to provide insurance or buy it on the spot from our permit office.
So this is not just restricting artists and musicians through the Arts Council grant. We're opening up to any artist or musician. Okay.
That's correct.
Thank you. Okay. Bottom of page 6, we're talking about loudspeakers, amplification, and things like that. I know we're going to be having a motion coming forward to sort of limit, where do you measure the 85% decibels? The suggestion is that it could come to the park's limit, but again, in a big park, that wouldn't be suitable. So how are we going to be, we can put policy in process, but how are we going to be governing this? For instance, if you have a small park and you go across the street to the residents and it's more than the 85% decibel, who's governing that? Who's going to make sure that we have great events, but we're not interfering with residents?
Through the chair, the report outlines that the idea here is that this is without amplification. As soon as you get into amplification, you start to have the potential to go over that 85 decibel limit. Without it, you tend not to. It's very difficult to measure, and but certainly without amplification, that right away makes it fairly simple to govern. As soon as amplification comes into the equation, then we ask the question, are you planning to go over 85 decibels or not? And if they are, we're then going through a process with municipal licensing and standards and the local councillor's office.
So I guess my question is, I mean, you don't want to squish this program before it starts. You want to allow some amplification. I'm just wanting to make sure that we have the bodies to make sure that they are doing what we're allowing them to do. That's really what I'm getting at.
Yes, and through the chair, the process is in place to be able to do that and work with that if necessary.
Okay, moving on very quickly, page 7. Item 8 says that we're going to be issuing these pre-approved locations will be issued within a week, 1 week turnaround. Sounds like a miracle. Can we actually really do that? Because I know I'm having issues now where my people are getting their permit 1 day before an event, and they've given 8 weeks notice.
8 weeks notice is for special events that require multiple approvals for sale of food, construction of tents, serving alcohol, amusement rides, and noise exemption that's above a certain decibels. And because the approvals are required from different divisions or government organizations outside of PFNR or the city, that's the 8-week requirement. These are simple permits where there is none of these. It's just they're permitting a stage with no amplification or minimum amplification up to 85 decibels. We'll designate a permit officer to just process it and issue it within a week turnaround. If any of the others come into play, then certainly it's going to be a longer process.
So it does sound wonderful, but does that mean that my permit people aren't going to get permits at all? Because right now, as I say, they're getting them 1 day before their street party, a whole event. I want to make sure we have enough staff in place to do what we say we're going to do, but not make our own permits we've got now any worse.
That's a special events permit that's outside the scope of the music in arts parks or arts in parks permit, which is promised a 1 week quick turnaround. We have, as you have seen in the report, we're looking at a process review of that to see if there can be any efficiencies achieved by working better with the other divisions that issued the permit to bring the 7-8 week timeline to something that's more manageable.
Okay, very quick.
So that's in the plans too.
I have 2 more very quick questions. Again, same page. It's talking about the possibility of allowing serving and selling of alcohol or allowing fireworks. Now, again, not all parks can have alcohol. Hyde Park is not allowed alcohol, and I would not, and I don't think my residents would approve fireworks in Hyde Park because of all the brush we have and all the trees. So those criteria would not be a blanket, those would be individual ones depending on which parks we're using. Is that correct?
That's correct. In fact, alcohol is mentioned here as an exemption. If there is alcohol and any of the conditions that are listed here, it's not subject to a music or arts in parks event. It becomes a special event or a commercial special event subject to a different fee structure and process. So it's listed as an exemption.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. And Councillor Layton?
Thank you very much. I don't know if this is on or not. That's on now. So we've got some rather busy parks in Ward 19, and I'm just curious about how we manage parks with multiple, that may have multiple permits issued on the same day currently. How are we going to ensure, like these are urban parks that are very, very busy, how are we going to ensure that that we're turning permits away now because there's already permitted events? How are we going to make sure that that doesn't, the whole park doesn't end up permitted 100% all day, every day?
So through the chair, I'm just going to start the answer, and then maybe Richard or Ann can add to it. But I think in the event of parks that are already quite busy and substantially programmed, the regular permit review process would still apply. So if there are too many permits already or too many permit requests in a park, then we wouldn't be approving the permit regardless of whether it was an art in the park permit or a music in the park permit. It would all be part of that evaluation of how many activities are going on in the park, or even if the park can actually sustain any more activity just with general public use.
So, but how do we communicate that notion that some parks might not be suitable because of their existing permits? How do we communicate that to the artists, either musical or otherwise, when they're looking at a map of the city and saying, hey, I want to do an event, here's where I want to do it?
Through the chair, the permit office, our customer service office has good tracking of all the permits that are in the parks. And essentially, if someone were to ask them, can we go for this park, they might say, they have a sense through the local councillor, through some of the post-evaluation, post-permit event evaluations that we do with local field supervisors. They have a good sense of, you know, have we outworn the welcome in the neighborhood or in the local park or not? And it's a bit of a balancing act, but every time there's let's say there is a permit in a park, every time there's another permit request, that goes out to the field supervisor as well as to the local councillor then to say, we have another request. How do you want to go forward with it? If at some point the local councillor or the field supervisor is saying, look, we're past a threshold of sustainability here, then we're negotiating with them to say, would you pick another location? Would you consider something else?
So it's not uncommon that we'll get a request for a noise a noise permit or an event of municipal significance, and we'll get it, and there'll be no time to turn it around. How as the councillor's office, the expectation for me is to consult with the community. How can we possibly think that we can manage a one-week turnaround when there's a lag between your office and my office and the community and my office to your office, your communication to...
Such a bureaucrat.
Do it faster? I can't do it any faster, that's the problem.
If I may, I want to emphasize that the one-week turnaround is really straightforward permits for music in parks and art in parks only, which are simplistic and does not require consultations with the local council.
See, well, but that's where we start to arise with a problem, because when we have parks that are already over-permitted and there's no communication of installations, for instance, and I'll use this as an example, there was a request for a noise permit for Nuit Blanche called rave tapes. Might not sound very offensive, but when you scratch a tiny bit beneath the surface, it was, and it's electronic dance music. I don't have a problem with it. I was listening to drum and bass and jungle when I was growing up. But
Which wasn't that long ago.
which wasn't that long ago, but the notion was, it didn't say anything about what was going on. What was going on was they were playing the soundtrack from raves from the 90s, all night, close to a residential area, and they were seeking a noise permit. And I was put in the position with zero information about what was going on to put one forward. I have better examples of film permits that have come forward that I wish I had known what was actually going on, because Donaldson was hitting home runs in Christie Pitts, and I totally missed it. But how are we going to start drawing those distinctions? When there's small events, when you're in a park that's already overly permitted, like Trinity Bellwoods Park, without any consultation with local councillor seems a little odd and off. What's the accountability mechanism for the community surrounding the park? There's limited.
only have one mic. I think through the chair, I think, as Richard indicated, there is an intuitive process that goes on around over-programmed parks. I think in the examples that you've given are probably our most in demand and sought out parks in a few areas of the city. I think we can commit to managing those parks specifically so that as a result of this project, they're not overrun with too many permits that then really wouldn't be a successful outcome for the community. So we want this project to be as successful as possible, and if it means a park being over permit, then that wouldn't be successful. So, I think we can make the commitment to work, with the local councillor where there are specific concerns to ensure that, there's an overview of all the permits that have been requested in this park for a particular period of time, and we can make some decisions around the kinds of additional permits that may or may not be allowed.
Can I just, and I'll just do one more question. The 85 decibels, who's going to monitor that?
Through the chair, as Richard indicated, that is, you answered it.
Sorry, I didn't hear it.
The 85 decibels.
Sorry, Jeannie. Sorry, could you repeat the question, please?
The 85 decibels, we can't rely on our existing MLS complement to enforce that, so how are we going to enforce it?
So the way our office takes that in is if there's amplification, they have to specify, are they going above 85 or not? If they are, there's a process through MLS that they have to seek permission for it. Now, we don't automatically agree to it. We will kick it over to the councillor to say, how do you feel about it?
How are we going to monitor the up to 85? Because we have people coming in and say, oh, we'll stay before 85. There is no intention of staying below 85.
Pardon? Yeah, it is, a sort of an honesty and consent basis. I mean, we do count on them to be honest with us. We've got a pretty good idea of when they're over 85, and that's where we write it up afterward. We have a post-event form now that our supervisors will fill out, and we're going to the local councillor and saying, did you get complaints? We're going to the permit office staff and asking if they've got complaints. And our own staff in the field to say whether or not we had complaints. We're writing that all up, we're documenting it all, we're giving it back to our customer service office so that we know for next time, did they comply, were they honest or not?
But then there'll be no monitoring on site day of.
If I may answer that, we do not have bylaw enforcement officers in Parks, Forestry and Recreation. The enforcement occurs through MLS, through a complaint process. What we do is we ban the organization from getting a permit ever again from PFNR if they break any conditions of the permit. So they can break their promise once, but from that point on, they will not be allowed.
But you won't have any documentation to say that they actually broke the permit. This is one problem we're getting in the weakness of our bylaw, is that there's never going to be a bylaw officer out there who's checking a decibel meter. It doesn't work that way. Unless we have a paid person that the organization, which we have done before, that the promoter or the event organizer has someone off on site. We have this all the time at Fort York. you're never going to get a situation where you say, oh, you were above the 85. It will always be in dispute. You don't have bylaw.
Councillor Layton, you're at almost 10 minutes.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Through the chair, just to answer that question, I'm reminded that if our permit staff in any way in the application process feel that someone is going to go above 85 decibels, they notify the MLS office and request that bylaw staff will attend the event. That doesn't mean they always do, but they will make an attempt, and it's on their radar. We put it on their radar.
Okay, thank you very much. And so now going to speak, and we have a visiting councillor, Filian.
Thank you. So, first of all, I think this is a good news report, especially for communities outside the downtown that are sort of crying out for more activities in their parks. And I know to some extent the opposite may be true in the downtown. Fortunately, we have some extremely diligent councillors who will be monitoring that. I have a number of suggested amendments that are just kind of cleaning up wording and clarifying intent that Councillor Doucette is taking carriage of. The first is to make sure that, the first one is that that for the sponsorship signage, that no percentage is specified in the report, and the intent in consultation that I've had with the department and with the music folks is that it be no more than 50%. So I thought, let's just put that in so it's clear to everybody. And then in the criteria section, first of all, that we add that local councillors be consulted prior to any pre-designation, and if there's any problems, they can ask that the pre-designation be removed. The intent of any of these new programs is to make things better, not to make things worse, and if it's not making things better or wouldn't make things better, then it shouldn't apply in those locations, and the people who know that best are the local councillors. I just have a change in wording so that it's not just one performance. One performance can sometimes be 3 minutes long. So it needs to be clear that it's for one performance or one event that could have multiple performances. As far as the amplification is concerned, we need to be clear on where the 85 decibels is measured from. If you measured 85 decibels from in front of the musician's speaker, amplifier, it would of course be more than 85 decibels. So we need to measure it at the point where the noise is going to bother somebody. So at the edge of the street, or as several councillors have mentioned to me who have large parks at the edge of a designated area, at which point it would start to bother other parks users. Just on the who's monitoring the decibels, you can get an app on your phone that measures decibels, and so we really should be able to hold the organizers of the event and the performers accountable for following the rules. It's very easy for them to, even in the sound check, to monitor that they're just send somebody up to the designated point with an app on your phone, and you can tell right away whether you're too loud or not. So hopefully everybody will be cooperative, and all of this will work out well. And just as an FYI, the overall Arts in the Parks program is going to include all sorts of other things. Just as an example, last night I was at Toronto Book Awards and speaking with a number of publishers about the possibility of having children's authors reading from their new works in parks on a Saturday morning, and they seemed quite keen on that idea. So there's going to be all sorts of warm fuzzy things, artsy things happening in parks. Well,
Maybe sensitive.
not to children.
Thanks, Councillor Fillion and Councillor Doucette.
Let me know when you're reading, I'll be there. So yeah, I think this is a great idea. I think we do have to open up our parks to new ideas, but I agree with some of the councillors, we have to be careful what we do. I also don't want to be promising things we
Sorry,
can't-
Councillor Doucette, just confirm that you were.
Oh, sorry, yes, I am taking carriage of this motion, and I'm not going to go through it again because you've heard. But the one,
Just 1 second, if there's any questions of the mover.
any questions of the mover on this great motion?
Why would you take carriage of that?
Because. But the thing I did add to this, actually, and I appreciate Councillor Fillion agreeing completely, was about our large parks. If you were to say in High Park, for instance, that you could have 85% decibels at the edge of High Park, you're probably interfering with all the natural wildlife in the park and all the thousands and millions of people we have in the park, so that's why I suggested a designated area. And in fact, going to that, High Park used to have music concerts. They used to do music concerts, used to take down the fencing around the baseball diamonds and use the baseball diamond area, the baseball area, and the soccer pitches. So I don't think I can take the fencing down anymore, but maybe we could do something where the soccer pitch is right now. Also in Hyde Park, we're very fortunate to have Shakespeare in the park. They come in May and they stay till September, and you can take a picnic and you sit on these, used to be hard rocks. As a VIP, you get a cushion. And you see amazing concert performances. So there are things going on in our parks, but I do agree we have to know what is in our parks now. We can't over-program our parks. I am concerned about this 1 week turnaround. I'm concerned whether we can actually do it or not. Because as you heard me say, some of my residents apply for permits. They do the 8-week notice. They're doing a street party. They're doing a whole BIA sidewalk party event. And they get their permit 1 day before the event. So they call me and say, where's my permit? Shall I actually organize this event? Can I organize this event? Am I going to be allowed to close my street down? Am I BIA is going to be able to put their stuff out? So we've got to make sure that it doesn't affect what we're not doing now, which could be even worse. And that if we're saying 1 week, we do the 1 week. If it's going to take 2 weeks, let's say it's going to take 2 weeks. That would also give our councillors a little bit more time to go out and talk to residents. I also am interested that, yes, councillors must be involved when it comes to designating the parks. We've got to have input as to which parks we feel would work and which parks wouldn't. And then we've got to make criteria site-specific. As I say, Hyde Park, since 1893, you're not allowed alcohol in the park. So I'm not going to open up that door, believe me. And also, well, John George Howard wouldn't allow it, so that's it. Fireworks, suitable in some places, not in others. Down on Lakeshore, possibly. In a local park, no way in heck. So as I said, we've got to look at these things. Now, one thing I do want to say is the art installations we had during Pan Am Games were brilliant, were amazing. I attended some down on Lakeshore we were doing along the Pan Am pathway, and it was stunning. Okay, it was pouring rain. Yeah, it was pouring rain, and we all went under a gazebo, a picnic area, and we had 1 or 2 tents, and we had dancers and drummers, and someone was painting a beautiful mural. It was stunning. Those are the things I envision us bringing in. I have a community group right now wanting to provide free programming to children, art programming to children. They're going to be coming to you for some help and some grant money. And that's the sort of thing. Book reading, poetry reading. There's so many different forms of art we have. In my ward, we also have a lot of film production. We have a lot of permits going into our parks to use our parks and on our streets. We know how to handle that most of the time. So I think as long as the people coming in respect our parks, we can tell them what we can offer them. I think it's a great idea. I do support it, but councillors have to be in the equation. We tend to know our residents well. We tend to know the ones who will step forward and have an issue. So sometimes we can, cover it. Street parties, for instance, we have one street where there's always one resident who hates the noise. So the agreement is the amplifier, the speaker is always turned away from that person's property. It's been going on for 5 years now. We live together, we learn to work together. So I like this. A few more tweaks to be done, but I generally think it's a great idea. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Cressy?
Thank you. First of all, I have two motions, if they can be put on the screen, and then I'll speak broadly to the program and the recommendations and my motions. Are those motions ready? Okay. One of them refers to Arts in the Park and the Music in the Parks program around Grange, and the other has to do with the private events and the permanent listing and the removal of one. Let me speak broadly, first of all, in terms of the Arts in the Park and the Music in the Parks permit category. This is a good thing, and I want to acknowledge off the top our arts advocate, Councillor Fillion, as well as staff, and I know Mike Tanner's here, been working hard on this for a while on the music side. We want to aspire ways to further animate our parks as hubs for the neighborhood and the community, and in particular to find ways to do that across the city. We know that and Councillor Fillion alluded to it off the top, that in some downtown parks, there's a concern that they're over-serviced and overused, whereas across the city, there's a desire to further animate them. And I think the intent here of the Arts in the Park program will help to do just that. What I like about the Arts in the Park program and the amendments that Councillor Doucette have taken carriage of, I think, helps to clarify and tweak some of the important pieces. But what I like about it is that some of the principles around it, and Claire spoke to it, they're free, they're accessible. The artists get paid. That's a key point here. Let's not lose sight of that. This is actually, artists get paid for their work. And that, of course, a principle that the parks have to be maintained after the fact. These are important guiding principles and ones that we shouldn't just snuff at. They are critical. And of course, also that as part of the contract and the partnership here, we're working with the Toronto Arts Council. So that's a pretty good implementing body. So I feel very confident with the tweaks that we've proposed around the Arts in the Park program. As it relates to arts and music, just speaking directly to Ward 20, this is something we have a lot of experience with. We, of course, have the Music Garden, which does a great deal of programming. Vermont Square in Seaton Village has an open tuning music festival in the park. They have a dance festival in the park. City Place down in Canoe Landing has City Fest, a music festival in the park. This year in the spring, our office will be hosting our first new annual event, which will be a music festival in a Ward 20 park. Mike Layton has his Bike with Mike. Well, we're having a music festival. This is something that we're looking to do in consultation with the community.
Sing with Joe.
What is it?
Sing with Joe.
Sing with Joe. There you are. I was going to make a joke, but I'm going to hold off. I would highlight, though, and this is what I think, we had two deputants speak to it, and one of my motions speaks to it, is we have a pretty proud tradition around animating our parks with art and music in Ward 20 in downtown Toronto. But we also have a park, which is Grange Park, which is very unique. We have the Grange Park Advisory Committee. It has a variety of stakeholders, the local community, OCAD, University Settlement, the AGO, and others. And we have our own permit system already in place there. Because of the demand, we want to animate that park, but we have a permit system we've put in place, and as part of a redevelopment, we're establishing a new management model in that park. And so the rationale for the motion that I've brought forward to specifically exclude Grange, I understand that the intent of this motion is to broaden arts in the parks across the city, and that Grange isn't necessarily to be included. But given how hard we're working, and given the desire of the community and the AGO and other partners, we want to be on the safe side just to exclude Grange specifically. As it relates to Recommendation 5 and my motion regarding H2O Park, Recommendation 5 that's being proposed is to allow private commercial events on a permanent basis, and in the attachment it lists 10 parks on a permanent basis. So we did this as a pilot project, and we're now being told that on a permanent basis these are the parks to be included, and this is, when this report was provided, the first I'd heard of it. I'm concerned that the other wards, this is the first they've heard of it. I'm concerned that local residents, that they will have not yet heard of it, and that's a problem. For me, I start from a basis, obviously, that we have areas of park deficiency, that we have areas of high density, and that I am not opposed in absolute terms to a private commercial event in a park. But I want to review that on a case-by-case basis along with the neighborhood, because I have had concerns about this pilot project from H2O Park. The report does not speak to that. And so for those reasons, I am specifically asking to remove H2O Park from the permanent list. I'm happy to look at it on a case-by-case basis with the community, but the notion that it can be permanently added without any consultation, frankly, isn't good enough. And so with that, and with those amendments, I'm very excited to support this program. I think the Arts in the Park program is going to be wonderful. I'm going to join Councillor Fillion for some of those Saturday morning readings, both for children's literature and adult literature, which I know will be soon published by Councillor Fillion next week, I believe. And I think this is a wonderful initiative. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Perks?
Thank you very much. I understand, Madam Chair, you have something that will deal with the sign issue, so I'll let that alone for now. I'm going to go along with this, but I have a reluctance, and I want to signal it because I think there may be an opportunity to deal with it down the road. In this is an effort, and I think it's a good effort, to give certain organizations a clearer path to be able to permit parks and animate them, and that's a great thing. But I want to note the supplementary report here, which talks about the ongoing problem we're having of community organizations being able to get over all the different hurdles necessary for them to animate our parks. And I worry that while we're doing a great thing for the arts, we're not solving the problem for people who live in the neighborhoods around parks and who volunteer in them. I've had a couple of experiences lately. A community organization in my ward held a big festival to celebrate the 25th anniversary of a park being opened in what used to be a TTC bus garage, and they had to spend thousands of dollars of their own money organizing the permits, organizing the insurance, getting through all the hurdles, and they're justifiably frustrated. And I wonder if animating parks for the local community is a low priority relative to this if we've really done our job well. That being said, I think it's important to understand further what's really at the root of our inability to make it easy for community groups to permit our parks. It's a financial problem. It's because we as a city don't have limitless resources to backstop insurance and to pay all the costs associated with big events in parks, so we have to offload it into people who permit them. That's a resource issue. That's a money issue. And I think we as members of the Parks Committee have to become better advocates at City Council for making sure we adequately finance and fund activities in our parks. I was profoundly disappointed at the last council meeting that Council didn't share the view of this committee that has to be a priority, and we have to make it clear to the Chief Financial Officer and the City Manager that Council believes funding for parks has to be a priority. So I'm going to be keeping my eye on the budget proposals that come from the City Manager this round to see whether or not we're addressing that underlying problem. We don't have enough money to support events in our parks. We simply don't. And particularly, I'm going to be keeping my eye on the user fees associated with commercial events in the parks. I'm profoundly disturbed to learn that we don't recover the full cost to the city of those commercial events. How on earth can we tell members of the public, no, your volunteer group has to come up with cash because we don't have enough money to backstop your event, but we do have enough money to subsidize on a corporate basis for-profit organizations making use of our parks. It's a failure in public policy, and I will be keeping my eye on how those user fees are managed in the upcoming budget.
Thank you, Councillor Perks. Councillor Layton?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I have a motion that the criteria set out in staff report respecting music and parks and art in the park be amended by adding, in consultation with the local city council, parks, forestry, and recreation staff, consider a cap on the number of permits issued on any single day or year in a single park. I'll speak to that in a second. I wanted to first thank my colleague, Councillor Perks, for pointing out two things. One, that how can we have a user fee policy that expects is developed on a cost recovery basis? We apply that formula for volunteer community groups, and yet we we aren't applying that formula to its fullest extent for corporate events going on in city parks, and I will fully support any motion that rectifies that. Second, on the money for staffing, I won't only be looking at that one item in the budget around user fees, but also on the financial support that this committee suggested should be included in the budget that has to do with busier parks, parks that have higher usage rates. And I appreciate that we want this program to bring arts to other parts of the city, but part of the reality is we're going to get a lot more applications for just a handful of parks, not just 1 or 2 parks in my ward, rather than the 20 parks that exist. So I don't think in and of itself it's going to provide that movement, but with support from the TAC and from some activations, maybe that will change. And I sincerely hope that's the case, because we do have a lot of events in some downtown parks. A lot of great events, a lot of loud events. We got a lot of events that a lot of people in our community appreciate, but when you start stacking events on events, it's going to fall down. And when you start having battles between 2 separate yet equally entertaining drumming groups going on in the same park, neither of which are permitted. But when you have these drumming groups, they're with a back and forth that you're trying to manage. You're trying to manage their space requirements and the noise going out to the neighbors, and they just keep getting louder and louder. They're turning their drums up to 11 because no one's there to monitor it. And it's great to say we'll work on the honor system. But I've got one of those apps on my phone to measure decibel rates. But when you're going on the honor system, and Mike knows, Mr. Tanner knows this. He'll go into a club and they'll say, "Don't turn it up. Don't touch this soundboard." And you know what they do? Their sound guy comes on and they turn everything up. And that's the reality of it. Where we have MLS officials that are monitoring this at the Garrison Common in Fort York, which we have very successful events at, they simply moved the point where they were testing, and my complaints shot up by about 100 for one event. At that same particular event where bands were told they had to vacate the stage by 11 o'clock, their encore went well past that date. And my residents knew exactly the minute they should have been off, and I started getting emails exactly 2 minutes later. And that's because they are one of those communities that are surrounding one of these great outdoor venues, but they have these weekend-long festivals every single weekend. And it's fine to say they moved downtown, they moved next to a park, they should have expected that. That venue location was in fact a tree nursery when they bought their units. It was not a giant stage. So we have to find a balance in some respect. And that's not to say we're going to shut these music events down. I love those. Field Trip's probably one of Toronto's marquee, and should be one of Toronto's shining pearls, whatever. It's something great. So we've got to get around this issue and figure out this issue of enforcement around the sound, because when we go back and our community says, well, we have them, they were too loud, they went past their time, unless we have some documented evidence of it, we're going to be in a really tricky situation, because there are going to be those that say, oh, they clearly weren't loud, and those that said that they were loud. And then how can we rightfully impose a ban when there's a question mark still hanging over it? I'll leave my remarks at that. I think that we should make it easier for people to activate parks in this way. I just hope it's not the same 2 parks.
Yep.
I would just like the minutes to note that Councillor Layton made what may be the first ever reference to Spinal Tap and bringing it up to 11 in the history of City Hall, and that should be noted formally in the minutes.
It's very important to know. Thank you. And so, Councillor Layton, on the cap issue, are you looking for staff to provide an answer back?
No, I think that this probably can be done it's probably an ongoing thing, that as events start to stack up in certain locations, that with the local councillor and probably the local stewardship group, we'll call them, that we'll have to develop something around that. And until this becomes a problem, I just want to make sure that local councillors will get some influence over this.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I'll just move my motion here as well, and this is in regard to number 4, and Councillor Perks, you made mention to that. So this one will come back in November, and so the General Manager, Parks, Forest and Recreation report back on November 23rd. The Parks Environment Committee with a recommendation to approve the sign-related amendment to Municipal Code 608, and that's a contained attachment C with the report. We can read the rest there. So that way it has to give public notice, that will come back. And so I'm also going to be supporting all of the motions here today, and I'll concur with my members of the committee and thank Councillor Fillion and Toronto Arts Council, which I was a member of. So amazing work as usual. Continued work. I'm no longer on, but hopefully again, just on many committees right now, but amazing work that you do, and thanks to Councillor Fillion and our staff and making this work, especially branching out to not the downtown, but I know they are busy with their parks, but coming out and branching out, it'll be amazing work. And especially some of the ones that staff are mentioning as well, that many of these other parks that where there's no surrounding community, and looking at that so that these decibels, the noise level won't be an issue. I myself too, when I have events in my area, then I usually hear the next day as well. So MLS cannot always be there, but then we take note and we either approve or not approve, and staff, or at least in my area, have always been amazing at getting back to me and asking my input or reflection after I've heard complaints after any event, actually, not just in a park, but any of the events that I have in my ward. So I've actually had a great relationship with staff and their feedback, and have had that relationship. So I can only speak for my Scarborough area, but I do thank staff and all their work on this. And I think that, can we vote on this as a package if everybody's in agreement with all of these motions? Can we do that? Okay, great. Okay, so all those in favor? Opposed? Yes, it is unanimous. Thank you so much. And that carries an item as amended. And unanimous again. So thank you so much, and thanks for everybody coming out today on Friday morning, and thanks so much.